I'm here beside the A9, above Killiecrankie and below the famous Dromochter Pass, and have stopped because here is proof positive that Scotland is not a barren wasteland. This, of course, is the classic scenery that everyone associates with the Highlands in particular. There are no trees, nothing grows, it looks desolate, empty. But look across the dual carriageway to the central reservation. There are trees, bushes, plants, flowers aplenty. Proof positive that this could be different. But it's the same land on both sides of the road, one barren, the other louping with growth. And when you finally get all the deer and the sheep out from the central reservation, this is what you get. Something the whole of Scotland could be repeating. So, is the Highlands, is Scotland a barren wasteland or just badly managed and overgrazed for centuries? That's what this film is all about. I'm Lesley Riddoch, journalist and land reform campaigner, and I'm taking a walk with two ecologists, Ron Greer and Derek Pretswell, to a very special place. Somewhere they started to transform 50 years ago. Somewhere that might just give us a clue about what much of Scotland could look like. In fact, Ron and Derek did an incredible thing. They grew a broad-leafed forest from scratch in a subarctic winter climate on sterile-looking land that resembled a golf bunker. All the experts at the time said it couldn't be done. This land, like most of the Highlands, has traditionally been the preserve of landowners, rich families who often came here only for the grouse shooting in high summer. So, despite modern access laws that mean we've every right to be here, Glen Garry feels very much like a place that belongs to someone else. But not for Ron Greer. Ron first visited Loch Garry just north of Blair Atholl in 1973 when he was monitoring fish in the loch for the Fisheries Laboratory in Pitlochry. That work made him realise something was far wrong. Without trees on the shoreline, and because the hydro dam meant constantly changing water levels, there were fewer leaves falling into the loch for the bugs that are eaten by the fish, and that stunted their size. So in 1974, Ron began a one-man crusade to fix that by planting trees on the loch side, hitchhiking the 16 miles from his home in Blair Atholl with a backpack full of fencing material and tree saplings. 50 years on, we're walking out along Loch Garry again to see what happened next. One thing that happened pretty quickly was that Ron's dad, George, decided to come along too. So what made your dad come up here anyway?
Well, I was telling him about my research work here with the trout and the char, and I said, there's good fishing here, Dad, and we've got permission. So I brought him up here in the family, and it was a great, we're catching lots of little trout you could fry up in the pan, and sometimes a big one, and it always used to annoy him that my mother caught more fish than him.
Right, so that that was the fish connection with here.
Yes.
And then the tree connection is...
Well, I was planting trees, once we got into the subject about what makes this environment tick, the trees were part of that. And further, my dad had always an interest in trees anyway, and we used to go out and collect acorns, and we would grow them in a window box in the slums in Govan Hill and then take them out into the countryside and plant them. So my dad, I owe a lot to my dad in that respect. He introduced me fishing and an interest in growing trees.
So Ron, what is it with the Arctic char actually? Why is it so special?
Well, it's a very archaic form of a salmon family member related to trout and salmon, but more ancient than they are. And what's in here is a relic population, like many other lochs in Scotland, of that Ice Age period. The Ice Age is still happening out there. Now, I started a study 50 odd years ago, and it showed in there's plenty of Arctic char, but they're stunted. And they're stunted because of lack of food. So there could be either more of them or bigger ones. What causes that problem is the fact that the loch is up and down.
Because it's a hydro.
The hydro goes up and down, it dries out the plants that feed the wee invertebrates, the shrimps and the snails and things that feed the fish. And there could be something like 50 to 70% loss of that. So it's very dramatic. So the handy thing is, we knew from other studies that the biggest source of food for these little shrimpy things is tree leaves. And of course we've deforested this environment. So the whole idea was to get tree leaves going into there to act like an underwater compost heap. Like you do in your own garden, you dig into a compost heap and it's full of wee creepy crawlies. And the significance of that was pointed out to us when we hosted international visitors here. And a Norwegian scientist, off the cuff, just said, yes, of course, if this loch was surrounded by deciduous forest, there would be twice as much food for the fish. And then that leads on to what the hell else are we losing because of that? We could get that increase in productivity in the water, but on the land, and when we've got the increase in productivity, you've got more options for wildlife and for people. So that's what drives us here.
All because of the Arctic char.
Exactly. Made us think in a different way.
Ecologist Derek Pretswell started working at the Pitlochry Fisheries Lab in the early 70s like Ron. He took a 4-year break to go to university, but came back to join Ron's tree planting crusade in 1983 and persuaded him to expand the operation. In 1986, the two-man band became the Loch Garry Tree Group, with 130 members eventually. Many were from the Fisheries Laboratory, and all were passionate about restoring trees to the shoreline. The research work they all undertook at Loch Garry changed their lives. They could see the fish were measurably smaller than fish in the forest-edged lochs of Norway and Alaska. But without trees, the whole ecology of the glen was also visibly faltering. So they set about more planting and fencing work. But walking along today, it's clear things didn't turn out as planned.
Have you guys noticed the grouse butts up there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just right down that little ravine, and ironically next to the muirburn, which is destroying all the areas of light areas of grass that's new growth because they've burned the old heather there. And you know, this is the essence of...
They're basically burning the heather to facilitate the grouse.
Yeah, young red grouse, young buds need long heather to nest in and short heather to feed. So they burn it to get new heather growth to feed grouse and increase grouse production. But it destroys everything that's in there. So if you're a little tree growing there and they burn it, gone. So there's no regeneration.
So that is basically the story of what this glen is all about.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. It's a grouse moor. It's managed for grouse, and it's not managed for the land itself.
And just while we're at it,
yeah,
that ravine.
That's an erosion gully. So the stuff at the top has had freeze thaw, and there's no trees, vegetation holding it in place. So it's now vulnerable to natural factors which cause this erosion. And that is the small erosion gully right along there. is the really huge one. And that used to be forest.
And as time goes on, what's going to happen?
Well, ultimately everything will start to move off, because if you look, the light green areas are right up to the edge of the erosion gully. So they're destabilising the edge of the gully itself. So the gully's going to get wider and the stuff's going to get faster, coming off faster, and it's just going to disappear, and we're going to go back to base rock essentially.
As it gets worse, it gets worse
faster. Yeah.
Exponential, explained in a winner. I don't know if you can see the line of craggy rocks there. If you look very carefully, you can see little trees just coming out the craggy rocks for the fire, and the deer and sheep can't get them. And that's a remnant of the woodland that was once on that site. And we've got a cracking shot now of trees on the horizon there. Again, the last remnant, and it's telling you what the real potential of this site is. It's not that.
It's a forest.
Yes, it's a lost forest. It's not welcome to the moor. It's welcome to the lost forest.
But Scotland's full of deer forests that don't have trees.
I always wondered about that.
It's an ancient legal term.
Yeah.
But no trees.
Classic. This is perhaps the nub of the issue. What we see driving around much of Scotland is not the land's natural state, but because it's been that way for our lifetimes and for generations before us, we tend to think it's normal. It's anything but normal. The last wolves and lynx were shot in Scotland centuries ago. People were moved off the land in the infamous Highland clearances, and sheep took their place. And then the Victorian Highland sporting estate emerged, forcing more people from the land, which created the perfect storm. The hungry mouths of sheep and the booming numbers of red and roe deer, now without any predators, meant our native woodlands never stood a chance. And that is what's still happening today.
This fence post is one of our original fence posts from the early enclosures that we put up, and it created a haven for plants, insects. You could hear our enclosures before you actually got to them. It was just fertile and productive, and the estate decided to take down the fences, and within 2 months this was down to about this level here. After having been this high, this is a recovery. And if you look at the rest of the vegetation here, you can see it's all been chewed down. And the startling thing for us was the fact that within 2 months, it had an enormous impact on the extent to which we had productivity. It just destroyed it.
In case anyone's missing the key word, sheep.
Yes. This is all sheep grazing that has destroyed or reduced the plants here to just remnants of the productivity that was in here. So all the time, the potential of this landscape is being eroded by the practices of, in this case, the estate. And the rate at which this happened shocked us, that it could just decimate. So when you start looking at the history of forestry in Scotland, it really rams home how quickly we could have lost our forest. And people didn't live long, so you didn't see the gradual destruction of the landscape.
So too many sheep, too many deer.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, it's not good for them either. Our deer are half the size they should be. And if you put them into forest, because they're a forest animal, then they will get twice as big, they will grow faster, they will have more young, and the young will be bigger. So in a sense, the number of deer being produced to harvest is even greater than it is now. So our system in terms of productivity has been, dominated by the land use practices we have now, and it's nowhere near as productive and nowhere near the potential that this landscape has, even in this subarctic environment with the Arctic char.
Because I suppose in an ideal world, you wouldn't really be wanting to have to fence everything in.
Well, this is an interesting point, because what is the cost of fencing relative to the cost of reducing our grazing animal numbers? And we've got all the negative effects of fencing, of grouse and capercaillie flying into it, exclusion of people from landscapes, all these things, and not only that, forcing an animal that's already not doing the best it could do into an even smaller resource area because they've been excluded from more land.
So the answer is, again, back to the numbers. Got to pull them down.
Yeah, absolutely. Hugh Rowe's 1980s, came back from a Churchill Fellowship study in Germany, 2 to 3 animals per square kilometre. And we had over 100 animals in some place per square kilometre.
Wow.
And now we're rediscovering 2 to 3 animals per square kilometre. And that meant deer get bigger, forest regeneration occurs, the whole system just goes, yeah, belter, and just blossoms.
As Ron, Derek and I continue our journey west by Loch Garry, we pass several isolated clumps of trees, all planted between 1974 and the early 2000s by Ron and the Tree Group, with the enthusiastic permission of the then landowner. Each wee woodland was protected by a stock fence to keep the deer and sheep out. But 20 years on, that's all been removed. With bare hillsides all around, it's no wonder the animals make a beeline for these islands of trees in a landscape stripped of other food sources. Still, one thing's clear. Despite what Ron and Derek were repeatedly told, trees can and do grow, even here. It's not the climate or altitude that stops this landscape from becoming a natural woodland, it's the sheep, deer and burning hillsides for grouse shooting.
So this is an example of something that works.
Yeah, it's woodland edge. It's the trees nearest the stream that input the leaf litter. You can see it very obviously, they fall into the stream here. And in this small kind of stream, up to 90% of the plant material that in turn feeds the invertebrates and the fish comes from tree leaves.
Which you planted?
Yes, we planted them. It was an experiment some years ago and it's worked, just scale. But that's what we're after when we're talking about shade for fish. We're also talking about food for fish. But of course, if you graze it all to death, you don't get that. And it makes me always wonder, when we've lost all that, how many millions of salmon and sea trout smolt productions have we lost because there are no trees, because of the way the land is managed? The fish and the land are united. But we don't see that. We think in these little compartments.
Onwards and upwards, Ron. Well, we've arrived at basically the centre of everything you've done, which actually arises from what's behind us here, which looks like a sort of little bit of a desert. Now, we know the story already about the need to have leaf litter in the loch for the wee beasties, for the fish to eat. But why is this bit significant on a hydro dam?
Well, it demonstrates the effect of the loch going up and down by so much that nature can tolerate a little bit variation, but this has gone up and down 30 feet, 10 metres, and it's beyond the capacity of the normal ecology to deal with that. So the question is, how can we find alternatives to remedy this challenge?
And this is the beginning, but ultimately we're just going to look at the culmination of all the lessons we learned here in Loch Garry with this enclosure.
Right, and this is the Big Daddy.
And this is actually an incredible bit, because here we have the kind of almost rock pile that you started with 35 years ago, and what you created, this beautiful little forest that proves it can be done. It's the same soil.
Yep.
So why?
Well, obviously, in relation to what we're doing out there, the tree leaf litter is going to go into the loch. We did this bit because it was like what you're saying there. It was basically a desert. It was even worse looking than that. So it was no good to man their beast. So we got permission to fence it off, we as the tree group. And it's because it was such a challenging site that we took it up. We had no regrets or whatever, no doubts that it was possible to do something better with it. And it was such a remarkable example of what can be done on what looks like an utterly hopeless site.
So how did you start though? Because it wasn't just a question of planting trees in that.
This is exactly the same as the drawdowns one. It's useless, effectively. And we started that because trees got into our blood. And we started getting interested in how they became to colonise Scotland at the end of the last ice age. And we recognised that this sort of landscape would be the sort of conditions that the colonising trees would face at the end of that time. So we started to look at that process and try to replicate it in here. And we used lupins and broom, because lupins are pump primers. They capture atmospheric nitrogen, the shaws, the leaves break down, but that breakdown of leaves starts to form soils. And the broom did the same. And we were interested in work from New Zealand, where they did a comparison to see what would happen. And broom took over. And lo and behold, broom dominated it and lupins disappeared. And planting the trees got the benefit of this supercharged landscape now, and they grew like stink.
But can I take you back to when you put the lupins in, you got the broom in, you got the wee saplings in the middle of it all, and everyone said, you're mad, right? Yeah. And you're going to kill the saplings with all these lupins and broom and everything like that. Were you ever worried?
No. No, we weren't. We never gave a thought. If they can't see that this landscape should be full of trees, why listen to what they're saying?
We had no second thoughts about it. We knew from the literature, talking to experts and the practical experience we have.
Part of the problems we've always faced here, you'll never get trees to grow here.
The Clan McCanny syndrome. The Canny, and the worst of the lot is the McWilneys. It will the day, it will the work the day.
Edinburgh University Forestry Department met us at the bottom and said, oh, you'll never get trees to grow here. Munson, have a look. And it was the culmination of all the lessons we'd learned doing the other enclosures with the tree group and such. And so this was belter.
It is a belter. I was here because it was in a book I wrote in 2013. Blossom, indeed. And actually, I remember this just like a little piece of nirvana. It was beautiful because they've unfenced this bit, and so again, the sheep are getting in. But I remember raspberry bushes, butterflies. It was, especially after the barrenness here. It was yes,
beautiful,
absolutely.
And what did you hear?
Birds,
insects,
everything.
It was alive.
It was. It still is, but the undergrowth's gone now.
Yeah.
Your plan, having got that under your belt and the naysayers being slightly, put in one side for a wee while, you then thought, where could we go next? And perhaps that what we're facing on the other side of this loch might be done the same way.
Exactly, Lesley. And in the year 2000, the millennium, the tree group, the Loch Garry Tree Group, the charity that was driving this project, was agreed with the Forestry Commission and the Millennium Forest, and we're going to put our own resources in, and we were going to take in 600 hectares of that hillside, which is now eroding to hell. And you can imagine when you see this, what could 25 years of forest growth on that hill and all those erosion sites, there was no challenge we couldn't meet there. But the landowner of the time was only interested in grouse, maybe worried about his power and authority, and we didn't get permission. And to this day, it makes me weep. Because if you see what's happening down in Carafran at the same time, the whole hillside, and I had once had a dream of Carafran and Loch Garry could be like twin organisations.
Carafran's down in the border.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And you see what they've done down there in an environment nearly as challenging as this. It's a great pity, but we know from this and other places, the challenge we met here could be met on the other side of the loch.
We started planting trees in clumps because of the microclimate effects, and we planted similar species in clumps, and we now know, this was intuition on our part, we now know that trees speak to each other and they will channel resources to an ailing tree within that group. So it's just how nature works. And it works in hot conditions like this, and it works in We were here with Billy Connolly. It was ice across the surface of the loch. Billy was skimming and we showed him what we were doing. And it was, you couldn't get a bigger contrast. There's much of a contrast between that and what's standing behind us.
Because today, it's roasting hot, that looks like a desert. Tried to tell people this is a subarctic environment, which it is, but that Billy Connolly shot, it looked like something out of Ice Station Zebra. So it rammed home the point about the Arctic nature of this environment and the challenges we face.
But so the point is then that even if it's subarctic, even if it looks like a pile of rubble, you can have trees here with the right management.
Correct.
We have a good northern climate, not a poor southern one. And the difference between our landscapes, between us and Norway and stuff, is not the temperature or climate, it's what we've done to the land.
I explained the conditions here to an Icelandic forester, and I thought I'm giving him the environmental pitch, the last place on earth, you know. And he said, "Oh, you have a very good place to grow trees there." And that, I thought, you know.
But let me take you to where we are now, because you've proved this. You've proved this all sorts of ways, right?
Yeah.
And yet, you know, that's being taken up in some places. Glenfeshie's further up the road. That's moving towards natural regeneration. Yeah. However, we've still got the barren look, the barren land, pretty much across swathes of the Highlands. What would you like who to do to change this?
Right. It's got to come from national government. Yes. And for once, you know, we've got a Holyrood situation where land law is under the control of Holyrood. It's not somewhere else. I mean, when, to be fair, in 2003 we got the first strategic land management or land reform since King David I came up here in 1123. 900 years of no change, basically. So we can't do it overnight. There's a long way to go, and they're tinkering about.
The problem's always been tackling land ownership. And what we tend to do is to rejiggle legislation and think we're making progress. And I think we need a fundamental change, and I think something like annual ground rent would come in, and it would change the landscape in which land ownership is operating and change the desire of landowners to carry on with this mismanagement of the environment.
Do you mean it basically costs you to have it like that?
Yeah. Indeed.
Derek believes a form of tax and annual ground rent applied by the Scottish Government would encourage landowners to own less land or manage it in a way that improves ecology and realises its true potential, with more woodland and all the opportunities that brings for people and local communities, as it does in similar regions across Scandinavia. There's no denying Ron and Derek have proved their point. Trees can grow in this place, in this climate, at this altitude. All that's needed is control of sheep and deer numbers, an end to moor burn, and vast swathes of Scotland's uplands would return to their natural wooded state, bringing climate, biodiversity and community benefits. It all seems so obvious. Given half the chance, the trees know best.
But you know, after all this, there is still hope. And strangely enough, this is the proof of it. Because here we see actual natural regeneration. And you two who think you've been coming up here for 35 years, this is new to you.
Yeah, this gobsmacked us. Absolutely. And all the time we're up here, we never expected this to happen. Well, look at it. It's the Martian landscape. And yet, this species of alder has survived. In fact, it's thriving. In the last 5 years, it's just boom, and it's all the way around there, and it's quite far. So they're surviving being inundated during the winter when the loch level's higher. It's just amazing.
And it all comes from the trees you planted.
Yeah, there's only a handful of this kind of tree up there. Most of the other ones are different species, and this has proved the point. The species has matched the conditions. It's survived. The trees are telling us where they're going to grow. We're not telling the trees where they're going to grow. All this is taken as a seed source and maybe a slight reduction in grazing pressure. That's all that's happened. It just shows you what looks like hopeless is not.